Right now, I'm in a ballet studio which doubles as a meeting space, and today it's going to be used for a model showing for Rossini's Donna del Lago production, which is coming very soon, and I'm joined now by the director, John Fool James. So tell me, what's the purpose of this?
La Donna del Lago is a new production which opens in May. And before we get to the first night, a very large number of people are going to work on the show.
And some of them are here.
That's right. Lots of departments across the Opera House. So both the technical production departments, shoes, costumes, wigs, makeup, but also other departments across the house, the marketing department, the development department. There's a real responsibility, I think, from the creative team who are making the show to share the ideas which we have for the new production.
And this, to me, itself looks like a work of art.
Well, that's the handiwork of Dick Bird, the set designer.
And we're going to be speaking to Dick later, yes. Yeah. It's absolutely beautiful. So you're going to be using this to explore some of the themes with the audience today. That's right. We're going to be talking about the ideas which we have in the production, and then how we're going to make those ideas clear to an audience visually. Take it away. As we've studied this opera, La Donna del Lago, the Lady of the Lake, we've become more and more fascinated by the world in which Walter Scott, a Scot, and Italian composer Rossini were writing. They were writing at the start of the 19th century and responding very much to the turbulence of the French Revolution. As a result of the French Revolution, kings weren't legitimate anymore. And so they needed, if you like, a new concept to make kingship legitimate. And they found that concept in the idea of nation, the idea of nationhood. Landscape is essential for understanding this piece. The story's set in the Highlands of Scotland. If you've never been to the Highlands of Scotland, you've probably seen Skyfall, the James Bond movie. The story's set in the landscape of the final scenes of Skyfall. And central to the story is the idea that this landscape has an emotional effect on you. When you go walking in the Highlands, you feel different. It makes you feel different inside. And that emotional effect is made real in the opera because landscape is personified. Landscape is put into the character of Eleanor, the Lady of the Lake. She is the landscape. She is Scotland. As the opera begins, we see a Scottish landscape painted into a 19th century room. It feels perhaps as if the landscape has been tamed, has been modernized, has been civilized. The room is filled with a chorus of whiskey drinkers. We like to imagine them as the Celtic Society of Edinburgh. The Celtic Society of Edinburgh really existed, and in fact Walter Scott chaired it. These people have come together to celebrate or invent the history of Scotland. And what follows is a liberal whiskey drinker's dream, the dawn of a united modern nation in which ancient tribes become extinct, but the wise leader gains legitimacy. This is a male fantasy, so all the characters you can see up there are men. All the whiskey drinkers are men. So the entire chorus is going to be dressed as men. The women, we're going to dress them up as men. Good luck, Yanis. Two characters from the story, Serrano and Albina. They lubricate the wheels of the story. They act as messengers, bringing on news that a battle's beginning, or assistants, helping find a prop. For us, they really become the stage managers of the story. And we think of them as Walter Scott and Rossini. As you can see in the model, there are a number of glass cases. It has, if you like, the feeling of a museum. The glass cases contain the tokens, the talismans, the mementos from which national identity and national history are constructed. This case, for example, contains the crown jewels of Scotland, which Walter Scott claimed to have discovered. During the course of the opera, Albina and Serrano put on white gloves and remove objects from the glass cases. So a cup, a ring, a kind of necklace, the kind of regalia of Scotland from the crown jewels, which are used as the props in the retelling of the history, fact or fiction, of Scotland. This history of Scotland is going to be told across periods. When that's happened, the chorus, those liberal whiskey drinkers, hear the distant sound of hunters and horns. It's as if the sound is coming from the landscape. It's as if they're listening to the sounds not only of a distant place, but also a distant time. And that time comes to life when the lady in this box, the Lady of the Lake, comes to life and emerges from her glass case. And you can see her there as played by Joyce Di Donato. As she emerges from her box, she's of course surrounded by those 19th century gentlemen who are fascinated by her. And perhaps one of them wipes up the drips on the floor, which she leaves behind her as she emerges into our room. She arrived in the space hoping to find her lover, Malcolm. But instead of finding Malcolm, she's instead herself found by King James. You see him here as played by Juan Diego Flores. He enters wearing one of those royal costumes which was previously taken off by the people in white gloves. He's a kind of playboy adventurer king. He's hunting a mythical beauty, the Lady of the Lake, when he should be, instead, leading his army in battle against the Scots. There's no sense at all in which at the beginning of the opera he's ready to be king. He's not legitimate. He's transfixed by Eleanor's beauty. Or to put it another way around, the landscape of the Highlands seduces him. In order to talk to Eleanor, he doesn't want her to know that she's king, so he goes undercover. He takes off his red jacket. Cyrano, Walter Scott, white gloves, picks it up, puts it back in a glass case. And King James, now disguised as new character name Uberto, travels with Eleanor to her Highland home. To do that, we open the sliders. They travel into the landscape. And so that landscape which you can see there opens, enabling them to travel upstage into a totally different world, a world centuries earlier, a magical fairy tale kingdom in which we see a castle amidst a forest. As the sliders open, the castle rotates so that we can see inside to the castle where Eleanor lives. So, Eleanor and King James have arrived in Eleanor's remote castle. King James watches as Eleanor is strapped into a wedding dress, and he learns that she is to marry the Highlanders' chief, the very man who he is supposed to be leading his army to fight. And so he must leave before the Highlanders arrive. We want to tell the story that James has fallen in love with Eleanor, but Eleanor has fallen back in love with the idea of love, back in love with the idea of being with Malcolm, who she first arrived to see. And so she rips off her wedding dress, convinced that she must reject the Highlanders' chief and instead find a way to be with Malcolm. Eleanor and Uberto bid farewell as Eleanor climbs back up the stairs and the structure rotates back round to close again. It's night, and we're outside the castle walls, and Malcolm arrives. He was in the king's army, he's deserted, he's travelled north into the Highlands to find Eleanor. Eleanor meets him, she's surprised to see him, they declare their love to each other. The piece has almost no love music in. Operas usually have lots of love duets. This one has this tiny love duet, it lasts about 60 seconds, in which they say, "I would rather die than live without you." While they sing that, very quietly, very discreetly, our stage band enter into these boxes here in the room. You can see on each side there are 2 boxes. There's a stage band of 12 wind and brass players. Rossini writes in the Act 1 finale, not for 1 stage band, but for 2 stage bands. When the opera was premiered in Naples, he would have had about 30 instrumentalists on stage. For us now in London, that's 12. But we're still going to try and create the feeling that there are two different musics going on. There's Rodrigo's music, the Highlanders chief, and then there's also Malcolm's music. And we think that if we separate those musics spatially by having Malcolm's band over here and Rodrigo's band over here, that we'll be able to hear those two musics working together. As the band begins to play, the structure rotates back round, so it's now back the way you can see it. And as it rotates round, what we discover is that it's been taken over by the Highlanders, by Rodrigo's men. They're sprawled all across it. Hairy, smelly, desperate, hungry men. Yanis, tell us about them.
Well, as John said, we're presenting them as raw warriors that are very close to nature and almost savage, I would say, and that in contrast to the king's men who are seemingly civilized. All the tartan fabrics that we will be using to make their great kilts, and which have been generously donated by Harry Streed, evoke the colours of the landscape that John talked about, the idealised Scottish landscape. And even though there's not extensive historical evidence of the tartans of the period, it's safe to say that they would function a bit as a modern camouflage fabric. When the warriors lie on the heather, they wouldn't be seen.
So I guess the key thing is that our 1820s liberal whiskey drinkers think that the Highlanders are savages who can't pass into modernity, and so they're painting them as savages. Eleanor enters down the staircase into effectively a bear pit of men, her head completely wrapped in tartan. She enters to the accompaniment of Rodrigo, the Highlanders chief's music. She stops halfway down, catatonic. She can't move, she can't speak, she can't face marrying the Highlander. Serrano, Walter Scott, announces that the king is attacking. Malcolm, the Highlanders chief, agree to fight together for Scotland. At which point the Highlanders hang a goat off the end of the structure here, while Albina, Rossini, organises a blood pudding. So we see alongside each other two separate things. We see in the 16th century a ritual preparing for battle, slaughtering the guts of a goat, blood pouring out, anointing the warriors with the blood of the goat, while over the other side of the stage, with silver forks, a blood pudding is served. We see the origin of the ritual and also its kind of modern version. And then Eleanor brings fire. She's turned into a warrior. We weren't interested in the girl who sits at home while the men fight. We were more interested in Boadicea or Marianne, the warrior who leads her men into battle. So she brings flaming torches down the stairs as the Act 1 culminates in a big sort of battle cry, big preparation for war. Meanwhile, the 1820s whiskey drinkers light their whiskey glasses from her torch, and then they toast her memory. That takes us to the interval.